Tariffs are back, with pharmaceuticals in the line of fire. This is Macro Matters, and we're talking tariffs. President Trump has announced a new slate of duties, including 100% on branded drugs and 25% on heavy-duty trucks. That's led to falls in the share price this Friday for companies including AstraZeneca and Novo Nordisk. But does it also show any trade deal made with the Trump administration could easily be turned upside down? Holger Schmieding is chief economist at Berenberg. Holger, pharmaceuticals exports to the US are crucial for many EU countries. Ireland alone exported 50 billion euros worth of drugs to the US last year. So how worrying is this for Europe?
Well, it is potentially very worrying, but there is a huge uncertainty about it. First of all, the EU thinks that actually these tariffs may not apply to US imports from the EU because we have our trade deal with the US, which did not mention that. And secondly, the US is making an exemption for companies that are investing in the US. And most of the pharmaceutical companies in Europe are big. Most of them have some facility in the US, and they are either investing into it or could easily say, we are upgrading these facilities, we are investing more in the US, and hence escape the tariffs. Also, there is a significant chance that the US will discover that a few of these medicines simply cannot be produced in the US in sufficient quantities. So we do expect that in the end, this adds to the confusion, it adds to the noise, but that it will not be a major disruption of trade. After all, pharmaceutical products, medicines, that's something that people really need, and any shortage of that in the US would not bode well for Trump.
The trade deal made by the EU Commission has been criticised already for giving too much ground, though. Does this show that was perhaps a mistake, since the Trump administration isn't a reliable partner?
Well, the problem is we know the Trump administration is not a reliable partner. We just have to live with it. We cannot wish to have a different administration. This is not the case. And yes, the trade deal between the EU and the US is asymmetric. The EU is cutting tariffs on US products, and the US is having significantly higher tariffs on imports from the EU than it had before Trump returned to the White House. But for us in Europe, what is much more important is that the US is not completely turning its back on Ukraine. So to some extent, for geopolitical reasons, we just had to deal with the US to some extent to please Trump, to keep him on board in what really matters for Europe, namely to keep Russia out of aggressing further, out of attacking Ukraine more and more and more, and ultimately to prevent Russia from attacking a NATO country.
How are you expecting the tariff situation, though, to play out for Europe? Have we seen all the downside, or is there more to come?
There is probably a bit more to come here and there as the US looks at sectorial tariffs. We also have the uncertainty if the Supreme Court rules that these blanket tariffs are not constitutional, then the US may go for sectoral tariffs under a different provision in the US legal code, sector by sector by sector. So uncertainty remains high. Having said that, over time, we are getting a bit used to the uncertainty, and probably the overall negative impact of the US tariffs is now likely close to be at a peak and will probably fade somewhat from late this year onwards, unless Trump were to escalate and escalate and escalate further, which probably he will not do, at least he should not do, because in the end, all this will show up in higher consumer prices in the US, which are not good for the congressional elections in the US in November next year.
How worried should European policymakers be, though, about some of their most profitable companies, like Pharma, moving factories to the US?
To some extent, this is probably happening, yes. Should we be worried about it? Yes, a bit. But we will likely also see many other companies not investing in the US. We get all the headlines about companies investing in the US, putting money to use in the US. We do not get the headlines about many often smaller companies who think the US is so unreliable, that's not where we want to invest our money. So I do not expect net a major, huge rise in EU investment into the US. although some, especially of the bigger companies, will have these headline-grabbing projects of adding to their facilities in the US.
That was Holger Schmieding of Berenberg. Don't forget, you can watch more videos on Reuters.com.